Mad Dog Mattis joining me now from Washington, CBS News senior political editor Steve Chaggaris and national reporter from the Washington Post, Elise Viebeck. Lots to get to. Steve, I want to ask you about Mattis. He was considered the heavy favorite for this position. How are Republicans and Democrats responding to this pick?
Well, looking at the folks who are going to be deciding his fate, Senate Republicans and Democrats, the reaction from Senate Republicans, not surprisingly, very happy about this pick. There are a lot of great things that they said about him on Twitter last night and this morning, and really almost uniformly positive. Democrats, on the other hand, pretty quiet, which is a bit interesting. I mean, Mattis isn't the most polarizing person politically, and so I'm not that surprised. But at the same time, you know, I think maybe we're going to be hearing more from Democrats down the road as we get closer to the confirmation process. Mattis has been out there fairly critical of President Obama and his efforts against ISIS, somewhat critical of the Iran deal. So wouldn't be surprised if we hear from some Democrats soon. We did hear from Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who did say she's going to try to stand in the way of allowing him to go through this process. As we all know, there's a rule that prevents uniformed military as serving as head of the Defense Department.
And speaking of that rule, Elise, he'd have to have a waiver to be confirmed, since the law requires that there has to be a break in a period of 7 years from military service to actually serving as defense secretary. He's been retired for less than 4 years. So what's this process going to look like, and is he likely to pretty much get this waiver?
Yeah, I think it seems pretty likely at this point, given his wide support from Senate Republicans. This is an experienced warfighter, was head of NATO, was head of the U.S. Central Command, very popular with Republicans, and someone who I'm sure Democrats, at least some moderate Democrats, will come around to in the end. But again, we saw that statement from Kirsten Gillibrand that she's not completely in favor. Like you said, this waiver would have to come because there's a law saying that an active duty person who has been only off for 7 years cannot serve. So it'll be very interesting to see if this takes place. I think Mattis, clearly, you could tell from that Trump clip, has enormous support among Trump's base and Trump's supporters. And I think that those people are going to be putting pressure on their members of Congress, on members of the Senate, to make sure that his nomination goes through.
And it's been done before. George Marshall, Secretary of State, had to get a similar waiver to be able to serve as well as Secretary. Steve, we heard from the president-elect last night on the first stop of his thank you tour. What are the topics behind these multi-city speeches Trump's giving, and why is he doing this now? Why is it so important to him?
Yeah, it's interesting. Oh, go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
That's all right. I was going to say, this, as we've seen with Donald Trump, not only through his entire career, but throughout this campaign, part of this is the show and the PR aspect of everything. And I think for him, going out there to these cities over the next few weeks and standing in front of adoring crowds of thousands of people is his effort to promote his message, to promote what he calls a movement to fix this country. And so this is really sort of a visual way of him getting out there and explaining to all of America, including the 63 million that voted for Hillary Clinton, that he is president-elect, and this is going to be going in his direction moving forward. And so he's doing it in a way where he's trying to show at least a positive visual message to Americans that this is what he wants to do moving forward.
And we're still waiting on Trump's pick for Secretary of State. He was asked about this on Fox and Friends. Let's take a listen to that bite.
Mitt Romney, if you do pick him, what can you say to the American public?
Well, he's been very gracious. And don't forget, I hit Mitt pretty hard also, I mean, before the fact. And so I understand how it all works. But he's been very, very nice. We had dinner the other night. It was great. There was actually a good chemistry. It was a really good chemistry with him and also with President Obama. There was an amazing, we were supposed to sit down for 10 minutes. And we ended up sitting down for about an hour and a half, keeping everybody waiting. But we had a great talk. And so I don't know, but we'll see what happens. We're going to pick our Secretary of State. We have some other announcements coming up literally very soon. And people are loving our choices so far. We're going to have an amazing cabinet.
Elise, we've seen a pretty stark turnaround in the relationship between Trump and Romney since the campaign. I mean, is he stringing him along, or is there something to be made of this 180 between these two former enemies?
I think that's the question on everybody's mind. It's still very possible that Trump is not taking this pick seriously, although, as you could hear from that interview, he does seem fairly sincere in his interest in Mitt Romney. Again, those two have really seen their relationship warm. They were very hostile to each other on the campaign trail, Mitt Romney in particular calling Trump unfit. And he has gone out in front of the media and obviously in front of Trump to try to mend those ties. We'll see. I mean, Mitt Romney would obviously be a pick that many Republicans in the Senate would support, less controversial than perhaps some of the other candidates like a Rudy Giuliani or even a David Petraeus, who we know is also on the table. Now, we'll talk about the fourth potential candidate is Bob Corker, who's a member of the Senate, a Republican, the head of the Foreign Relations Committee. So, again, Trump is working with a pretty diverse group here, and it'll be interesting to see which way he goes. But I do think it's an open question about whether he is, like you said, stringing Mitt Romney along.
And Steve, Capitol Hill colleagues of Senator Bob Corker are lobbying for him to lead the State Department. Compared to other frontrunners what do we know about Corker that makes him actually stand out in this position?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think he could be looked at as a potential compromise pick. As Elise mentioned, there's a lot of controversy surrounding some of the other choices there. I mean, if you look at Giuliani and his business background, at least his recent business background, Petraeus with the classified info, or at least admitting that he had mishandled classified information, and Mitt Romney for political reasons why he's controversial. I think people look at Corker and say this guy could be a compromise. You hear his Republican colleagues just rave about him in the Senate. They see this guy as somebody who could sail through confirmation very easily. In fact, you even hear Democrats, even though they don't agree with him politically, say that he's a guy who not only has the knowledge and experience to do the job of Secretary of State, but also the right temperament. So Corker seems like a guy who could be the right compromise pick if that's the direction Trump wants to go.
And Elise, the president-elect touted a deal yesterday. Everyone was buzzing about this. The Carrier plant in Indianapolis, it kept 1,100 jobs from being outsourced. The unemployment rate, we just learning, it hit its lowest point in 9 years this morning. So is the administration leaving the economy in good shape for the incoming president? I know it's hard to sort of pit the economy with the presidency, but how is that faring right now?
Yeah, it seems like Obama is certainly leaving on a good note for the economy, and that is a huge advantage for Trump. Remember, 8 years ago, the economy was in free fall. That's what Obama had to cope with during his first months and year in office. Trump is coming in at a time when things are pretty good. But we should also mention that as this Carrier deal was announced, the standards from Trump supporters are extremely high. Their expectations are extremely high based on the things that Trump promised. He basically said he was going to be able to stop many companies from shipping jobs overseas. And even Carrier, we know from looking at the details of the deal, is not going to stop moving some of its jobs to Mexico. So again, things are in general in a pretty good shape when we look at the economy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Trump is going to meet those high expectations that he set with his supporters.
Okay, Elise Viebeck and Steve Chaggaris, appreciate you both for joining us.